All right, good afternoon. I see new faces out here. Welcome. This is a regular series we've been doing for about 3 years now, just entitled Edgar Cayce on, and then insert whatever the title or subject matter is from there. Many of the ones that we're doing come from the A Search for God book, which is a book that was put together from the original first group that worked with the Edgar Cayce readings to be able to put the fundamentals down of what it takes to be able to live a life of unconditional love as it came through in those readings. The chapter on glory is just one of 25 chapters that are in those books. And so there's an ongoing series of that, as well as other subjects that we cover as well. When I say we, you see the name Steve Bobbitt up there, who is the other person who does the presentations on a week-by-week basis. Because he still works for a living, and I'm a drag on society, I will be doing this week and next week, and then because of his working schedule, he can't do the last week. So that's the one that I will be I'll be starting and closing this and doing next week as well. The rest of them will be Steve Bobbitt. Because, as you saw me setting up all the recording equipment in the back there, we produce all of these videos and place them on YouTube and have a regular channel for Arizona ARE, Association for Research and Enlightenment, that allows people to be able, if they aren't able to join a small study group that works without a Search for God material, those books does allow them to still have these presentations to refer to and catch whatever it is, or unless you're a chaplain at Unity of Phoenix and can't attend the group meetings, as one of us is here. And it allows us to be able to offer the information kind of in a lecture form instead of in a small group discussion. So the reason I throw the disclaimer out there is mainly not that you don't would have a problem understanding it, but we have a worldwide audience. I mean, maybe 90% of the people that watch these are in the United States, but I mean, it literally goes all the way over to Africa, in Asia and Australia, etc. And so the disclaimer is letting you know that I am not the official spokesperson for the ARE headquarters in Virginia Beach or the organization. I have a very long background in the Cayce readings, and what you're getting is what I like to affectionately refer to as the Gospel according to John Schroeder of what the Edgar Cayce readings are all about. And so what you hear up here is really my interpretation of it. Just like every time you go to church, you aren't necessarily getting God's exact word, you're getting that particular minister's interpretation of what he read in the Bible, or whatever the base holy book is that church comes around. So we invite you to go ahead and any of the material that I have up here, I welcome questions, and if you would like, I'll leave an email, a PDF copy of what the readings are for that particular chapter, Glory. And again, I have an email address at the end to be able to do that. So let's begin. And what you're able to get two different things here, and I'm showing this right up top. If you're not familiar with the Edgar Cayce material, that 262-92 is referring to anything that starts with that 262 means that it's for the Search for God material. Actually, you have a book right there as I'm looking at it. If you want to turn around, that's what the Search for God book looks like. And all of these readings are in there in this format where it says A Search for God 2. It's the second book. They finally put them all together a few years back, and it's chapter 8 in the second book and page 83. And if you have the book, you'd literally be able to find on page 83 that quote from down below. Up here it says, of the readings that were given for the A Search for God book, that this was written based on what you have up there in the 92 is telling you that it's the 92nd reading in the sequential order that was given on January 12, 1936. You know, I just give you an aside right here. A lot of people say, well, you know, Cayce's so blasé or passé. And for instance, one of the things that he made if you want to call it a prediction, he goes, one day humankind will be able to diagnose any illness in the human body from a drop of blood. Now, he said that, I think, in 1921. So when you think that it was almost 100 years ago, they're going, well, of course you could diagnose anything from a drop of blood. Well, today we understand that a whole lot better, being almost 100 years later than when he first said it. Back at the time he said it, they're going, are you nuts? And there are an awful lot of things that come out of Cayce in that way. Anyway, so that you know that the top quote here is dealing with the subject matter of glory to define it originally in the readings, and then this gives you a taste for how it actually ended up in the a little more readable format of the Search for God book. Glory is the ability of the individual, the object, the personality, the God force to serve. Now, one thing I do want to point out here, when you see in all caps, that's not me yelling at you, that's Cayce yelling at. No, it's not Cayce yelling. It's the secretary, Gladys Davis Turner, who was a stenographer. When she would take the information down, if Cayce, when he was giving the information, emphasized the word, she put it in all caps so that we would get more of a flavor for what it was like. So it's glory is the ability of the individual, the object, the personality, the God force to serve. So if you get the idea of why it is put out there like that. Now, down here, this is how it literally is printed in the book. So it's not coming from Cayce, it's the emphasis is coming from what was originally given in the readings. So the way this comes out is the interpretation of glory, we sometimes let conditions disturb us. Therefore, we often get an incorrect understanding of it. Glory is our ability to serve, which is an opportunity given to us by God. Now, I guarantee if you went to Webster's dictionary and looked up glory, it's not going to be defined as the ability to serve. It's, you'll find that with an awful lot of things in the Cayce readings that are very clear that the way, in fact, I'll have another couple of words up here, particularly knowledge and wisdom, that have different interpretations than what you would get from a secular dictionary. But it's interesting what it talks about in the reading where it says the individual, the object, the personality, the God force. Now, are all those things different things? Yeah, there's a different way of looking at each one of them. The individual would really refer to the soul that each one of us is. So that we are, as the Cayce readings put it, a corpuscle in the body of God. So each one of us actually makes up the totality or the consciousness of God, and we are like a corpuscle or a piece of it. The best thing I've ever been able to see that describes this or demonstrates the way that it works is you take this circle that's like in life science, and they'd show you a zygote in the very beginning, that single cell right when the sperm and the egg get together and all that. And it becomes this life form, a zygote, right off the bat. And then it divides perfectly into two cells, two identical cells right next to each other. You can't tell the difference between them, and it started with one. Then the 2 goes into 4, the 4 into 8, 8 into 16, and you can do the math from there. So that's exactly, or I don't know exactly, but it's a great analogy in terms of being able to see the analogy of what Cayce says God did. In terms of creating us in his perfect image, how about you still have this one big circle, which is the totality of God, the consciousness of God, that is divided into an infinite number of cells before that. All right, so if we are all identical cells within the great big zygote, then that shows how we are actually a part of God. And here's another question that it answers beautifully, and that is, we hear things in the Cayce readings that says the soul has always been and will always be, that we are eternal, just like God. And you're going, well, God created us, so we had to have a beginning, didn't we? Now, if you go back to my analogy with that zygote, and you have, let's stop at, call it 256 cells there. You have 256 identical cells that were within the one cell originally. Tell me which one of them is the oldest. And you think of that, you're going, there was never a time where one of those cells was older than the other. We have a different way of looking at that totality, being God that has always been and will always be. But we're also looking at it as to why we have no beginning and no end. And so souls are indeed eternal. So that would be the individual. The object would be things that do have a beginning and therefore have an end, like these physical bodies or anything. The manifest universe. If it has a beginning, it has an end, according to the Cayce readings. That also, what was that, The Matrix or something? You know, it's a science fiction concept as well, that those things that have a beginning have an end, but they can be regenerated again, just like you have with the Big Bang Theory, you know, where it all comes together and then starts the whole process all over. The personality. What is the personality? According to Cayce, and you can think of this by a show of hands, how many people in here are familiar with the concept of reincarnation? Okay, just about everybody. So you're understanding now, one thing I do want to point out, reincarnation is very different from the Hindu concept of transmigration. In transmigration, you could come back as a flower or a bird or an insect or a human or whatever the next life form would be. Cayce's very clear. It is reincarnation, which means you come back as a human, as a human, as a human. You don't start transforming into other forms of life. So human beings are quite different from the animal, insect, and plant life kingdom. Now, in terms of the personality, think of it this way. How many people are aware and believe that they've had past lives that are very different from the one that they have right now? Yeah, right, easily half of the folks that are familiar with the idea of reincarnation. So in some people's cases, they'll say, well, you know, in this life I was, you know, like an untouchable in India, and then I was kind of like royalty in the Middle Ages, and then I was, and you can go into all of these things that would be a very different personality. Maybe you were a Roman soldier or a Viking, where you have this very different personality than if you were an untouchable over in India. This is what we're talking about in terms of personality, where you could be an introvert or an extrovert. Does that mean, if you have those different personality traits, does that mean you, the soul, is a different person? And the answer is no. You just come into that particular lifetime with particular soul lessons to be able to learn and experience. And sometimes you need to be really bright and sometimes not so bright, or wealthy or not so wealthy. Have, you know, a really loving home and supportive environment at home, and maybe not so much that. You see what I'm getting at? So each lifetime is unique, and that is the personality. So that we have these unique changes each and every life, even though it's still basically the same soul within. The way I like to be able to give an analogy for this has to do with icebergs. Everybody's familiar with, you got this concept of an iceberg floating in the ocean right there, and only about 10% of that is showing above the water. 90% of that iceberg is below the water. Well, what if it was able to just go ahead and shift so that the 10% that was above goes underneath the water and you have more of that iceberg up there? It looks completely different than what that first view did. Still part of the same iceberg. So I'm trying to give you the idea that what lies within each one of us as a soul, we're really missing about 90% of what each and every one of us is all about. So we want to make sure that, if you've only got 10%, and I'm making that number up, right? But if you've only got 10% of the iceberg showing, if we only have a fraction of what the soul, this infinite, ultimately powerful, omniscient soul made in God's image, if you're only getting a minute fraction of what it's worth, you can understand how the personality and the individual are very different. Okay? And God force is kind of self-explanatory. I'll get to it a little bit later. I've got some graphics that go in to explain what is the difference between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It'll really go into a great bit of detail with that whole thing. All right, so moving on, this is from A Search for God in chapter 8, the chapter on glory. Then, if we would fill the place for which we have been called, we would let our glory, our knowledge, our wisdom be in the Lord. For our glory is only a reflection of the glory of the Creator. It shines on us and through us as we become channels through which blessings may come to others. You know, one of the things that's a little difficult, especially if you come from a traditional Christian upbringing and background, this almost sounds blasphemous, but God glorifies us every bit as much, if not more, than we glorify God. All right? God is actually glorifying us because He's giving us the ability to serve. He allows us to be able to help humanity out there, help our neighbor, help others, our family and coworkers and friends and all of that. God is glorifying us to give us the opportunity in order to be able to manifest his love in the earth. So we start to understand that the glory that we have is a reflection of the Creator. God is giving us the opportunity to serve, and in return, we should be a mirror reflecting of that opportunity as well in everything that we wind up doing. So what do we wind up glorifying in our society? We glorify, our leaders. You can talk about Mohandas Gandhi or maybe Martin Luther King, certainly Jesus. When we're saying, who is it that we go out and offer, say glory to God in the highest, etc. And then we also are, for people that, we just have Memorial Day, and I'm looking at the flag over there, in which we glorify those that have given their lives so that we can have the freedom that we have here in the United States. And we also wind up, you take somebody like Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein, and we glorify them to give because those people, their greater vision out there, have given us an understanding of the world around us and even the universe that just wasn't around before. I think I heard a statistic one time that a fifth grader knows more than the great minds like back in Plato's time. So you take somebody like Plato, and as brilliant a mind as that person had, and I think that's what they based that title. You remember that TV series called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? That's really why they stuck it at fifth grader. They're going, here you have a great mind like an Aristotle or a Plato, and yet a fifth grader has a greater understanding of how the world works and how it fits into the universe and even the greatest minds of the past. But we still glorify them because it was their shoulders that other people stood upon in order to get there. And who were they? They are God's gift to us in order to have been able to get there. So here is where I was talking earlier that we were going to talk about definitions of knowledge and wisdom. So the question that came up is posed for itself in the book there. What is true knowledge? We have knowledge when we seek to express less and less of self and more of God in our dealings with our fellow man. And then you have the definition of wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to use knowledge aright. I think it's humorous, but it does illustrate this really well. Knowledge is knowing that the tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. I always appreciate that because I'm going, okay, now that to me that draws a line that, especially if it's somewhat humorous and you can hang on to the concept a little easier with a joke than if you're trying to memorize straight definitions out there. But we can understand everything there is to know about this universe and be missing just huge pieces. Here's a good example. What if you were to understand all of the laws of aerodynamics, and yet you didn't build an airplane that followed those laws of aerodynamics? You can sit there and do all the math out there, and your plane's still going to crash. So I think it's just like the laws of aerodynamics is the knowledge that we would have of how those things work. Wisdom is knowing to build a plane that falls in harmony with those laws so that you can make it fly instead of crash. So that's that really makes sure that we have a definition there. In order to be able to glorify people, we need, when I say people, I mean our neighbors, ourselves, etc., that we wind up being able to do that through having knowledge, being able to learn how and why we were here, and the wisdom to be able to use that knowledge aright. So this is really integral. In fact, both of those, knowledge and wisdom, are other chapters in that Search for God book. Am I in your way? You can get copies of these PowerPoints at the end of it if you just ask me for it. I'll email it to you. So we have a reading directly from the Edgar Cayce readings at 262 being the Search for God, and this one's 89. So it's a couple of readings in the series earlier still dealing with glory. Usually a chapter had about 4 or 5 readings from Edgar Cayce on each one of the subjects. So starts out with a question posed by the group 1 people that worked with Cayce, asking Cayce's source, please give a discourse on creation. And the answer Cayce gave, I don't think I mentioned this, the underliner, my emphasis on there. It's not anything from Gladys Davis Turner that he said it differently. I'm just pointing out what I'm highlighting it so you can see why I placed it on here. So, what is the discourse on the creation? As has been given, souls were made to be companions with the Creator. And through error, through rebellion, through contempt, through hatred, through strife, it became necessary then that all pass under the rod, tempted in the fires of flesh, purified, that they may be fit companions for the glory that may be thine. How many of you are familiar with Edgar Cayce? About half of you. He's a psychologist, mainly, that really had a very tough upbringing. And he developed just a whole line or train of thought. It's very Buddhist in nature. I guess if I have a complaint with it, in fact, I should explain that. You will hear me refer to God most often as a male pronoun. I will say he or him or father. And the reason that I do that is not because I think that God has a gender. I don't think any of us have a true gender as a soul. There's no gender involved there. What I do have a problem with is I have gone out there and said, Father, Mother, God, Great Spirit, creative force, all of those things don't make it feel like I have this parental relationship with my Creator. And so I could call God Mother just as easily as I could Father, but to be able to call God something that shows a family connection was really important to me. And why did I decide to go with a he rather than her on there? Because Jesus did. And I read the Bible, and I grew up, very much exposed to the Bible. In fact, my mother recorded the Bible and played it to me through a pillow speaker as I was going to sleep, if you wonder how. I still have long sections of the Bible memorized just because of how many times I've heard them over and over again as I was dropping off. So but I've become indoctrinated with the idea that it was always Father. I'll take a side note for just a moment to show you how important that is. Jesus almost always referred to God as the Father. There was a time that he didn't. He was on the cross and he said, my God, hath thou forsaken me? Or why hath thou forsaken me? Most people are thinking, especially from a traditional Christian standpoint, that is when he lost faith. He felt abandoned. It was really the deepest, darkest. He took all the sins on to himself, is where a traditional Christian standpoint comes from. Oddly enough, it is an indicator of how much he was trying to comfort everybody that was there in front of him, watching this and taking it for the worst perspective they could instead of the best. One of the examples I like to use is, I have an old enough crowd here that if I said, Winston tastes good like, how do you finish that? My gosh, everybody knows that one, right? Fly the friendly skies of... Everybody knows the answers to these because it's our secular society, the things that we go through over and over. Do you know what they used as entertainment back in the times of Jesus? They were the songs that were also called psalms. Would you like to know how Psalm 22 opens? The first word of Psalm 22 is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? The rest of that psalm goes into this whole diatribe of how awful everything is. Guess what's in there? It talks about how they crucified the individual that's writing this psalm, actually crucified him, actually took his clothes and gambled them to the winner. This is actually, go back and read it. You'll be able to see this for yourself, and shows you that it looks like it's the deepest, darkest of times ever. And yet, at the end of it, it says this is all serving to glorify the greater manifestations of God in the earth. No matter what it looks like, that's what it's about. And so there's Jesus up on the cross going, Winston tastes good like... No, I'm kidding. He was up there saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Knowing that they're going to say, like a cigarette should, or united at the end of it, knowing that they have the Psalms, just like we have our little commercial jingles, to fill them in. And so I really want to point out that that was not a point in time where Jesus was showing a lack of faith. It's where he was still ministering to everybody that was out there in front of him. This is not what it looks like, folks. This is really a wonderful thing if you'll just give it time. So it really is a lesson, if we will, that as we separate ourselves in God, as it says that we, through error, rebellion, through contempt, hatred, and strife, we have separated ourselves, not that God left, but that we've turned around. We face the light, and if we turn around, did the light go anywhere, or are we just focusing our attention in the wrong place? So if we understand that that's what's going on, we have to start turning back around to face the light in order to be able to make the connection with God's omniscience and omnipotence again. Here's another thing. Most of you are familiar with eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Most everyone's heard. Everybody familiar with the concept of karma? Okay? And then we have good and bad karma. Good karma we enjoy, bad karma we don't enjoy. Can I offer a different perspective on karma than you may have had before? There is no such thing as bad karma. There is only good karma, because there's karma that feels good and karma that feels bad. But what is karma all about? When you're a parent and you're raising a child and the child's doing something wrong and you go into a disciplinary process to be able to instruct the child that that isn't what they should be doing, is that bad karma for the kid, or is it instructional to get them to understand that they need to alter their behavior to have a happier, longer life? Don't run out into the middle of the street, that sort of thing. And even though the kid's really feeling, oh my God, I've been yelled at or I got spanked or whatever, why? No, you don't spank anymore, right? Somehow I survived. I'm sure you all did too. But, but you wind up having a situation where it feels really bad for a moment, but in fact it was nothing but a positive experience to be able to give you the opportunity with what was happening to learn how to do it better next time. And if you mess up again, you get another opportunity to learn how to do it again next time and to measure up to the best that's within yourself. So all karma is good, absolutely good. Even with Jesus up there on the cross, and you're going, he didn't deserve to be crucified, and yet, as the Bible says, he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. Even though he was God, there was still a greater manifestation that Jesus came up with, because nobody had been more obedient than he had to that point. He raised the bar for everybody. And you know what he also said? The things that he does, we will do in greater. So we will do nothing but keep getting bigger and better and more wonderful in the choices that we make. He was obedient. Trust me, there will be souls throughout eternity that are constantly showing greater and greater levels of obedience, because that's how it works. How can I glorify God in my life? Well, how many people were raised Roman Catholic? My mother was, so I have got a few. My mother's standard line in the Catholic Church that we were created to praise and glorify God. I mean, that was kind of her stock response from growing up in catechisms and all of that. I guess one of the things that really concerns me about that is, if God is truly omniscient and omnipotent and created souls only to make his manifestations of unconditional love even better, why does God need these creations that he put together to glorify him? It makes it sound like a very little God to me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if we were to, how would we feel about a person who just isolated themselves over here and built a bunch of little, minion robots that would sit there and bow down to him? You would really look at that person and go, there's something wrong with you, that you would require that. And if you put this on this God force level, going, I'm going to create a bunch of souls that'll tell me how wonderful I am, that makes it sound like God has terrible self-esteem that constantly needs to be propped up, and that the creation, is required in order to do that. Is just a scary thing. So the Edgar Cayce readings, in terms of this glory or our ability to serve each other, becomes really important, because what Cayce says God created us for was to be companions and co-creators with him. Companions and co-creators. Now, this one starts to make sense. Imagine for a moment that your consciousness is the only thing that exists. And you understand that you have this unlimited potential, this omniscience, this omnipotence. You can do anything, but you're just there on your own. Now, what's the first thing that you would do? I rarely get a different answer to this. If you're just sitting there Knowing you have all this potential, what's the first thing you're going to do? How about create somebody to share it with? I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. How many people answer that going, I need to create somebody to worship me? There's something wrong with a person that answers it like that, and that's why I know that's not the answer for why God created us. God wanted companions, and he wanted co-creators. How many people go to Disneyland on their own? Not that it doesn't happen, but if you've got an opportunity to take good friends or family along with you to Disneyland, bring them. That's going to make the experience that much better to be able to share it with them, and that you get to see it through their eyes and they through yours. This is what we do throughout eternity. There are an infinite number of souls, an infinite number of dimensions or realms that we can do an infinite number of things. And so you never, ever run out of all of these infinite varieties of ways to be able to get along well with each other. There's also an infinite number of variety of ways to get along poorly with each other, and we seem to be exploring those as well. I don't recommend it, but it is not why God created us. Now, let me finish the story, or the idea of, did God create sin? I mean, if all there was in the beginning was God, and there's clearly sin around, sin had to have come from God. I mean, that's the logic that says if there was no sin when there was just God there, and then God starts to expand everything and sin arises, did God create sin? And my answer to that is no, he did not. God created the potential for sin. One thing I like to go back to is I don't know if any of you play music, but there's 88 keys on a piano keyboard. And that was invented back in 1700, 1701. I can't even remember the guy's name. It's a big, long, unpronounceable thing to me anyway. And he invents the piano. Now, when you think this guy invented the piano, and you think, well, I think what I'm going to do is put these 88 keys together so I can have a 5-year-old come up to it and go, you know, what little kids do every time they sit down at a piano keyboard, right? Do you think that's why he decided, I'm going to create the piano? Or did he have a vision of somebody, a very talented Rachmaninoff, able to sit down and play a beautiful piano concerto, and it just warms the cockles of your heart? All right, I'm really thinking it's the second one there, that he created the piano in order to be able to have this beautiful music put together out there. Now, if you would have asked him, what do you think's going to happen if you have a 5-year-old kid who comes up and gets in front of it, and he goes, well, you know, I created the 88 keys for beauty and harmony, but if they want to do that, they have free will, and that's their, you know, their choice to be able to do that. But everybody has to start somewhere, and you start like that, and then you figure out line upon line, precept upon precept, how to make beautiful music instead of a loud, ugly noise, or a joyous noise unto the Lord. So the whole idea is, did God create evil? No, God created this, all of manifest universe, to say, here's your 88 keys. What are you going to play? And then you figure it out from there. It's up to each one of us with our free will in order to be able to make that work. So we're back to, again, a Search for God quote and then a reading here. What is evil? It is good misapplied. Good used to satisfy the desires of self. So is sin, so is illness. They are caused not by being at one with God. The glory of the body, then, is selflessness. And then we come to, this is actually a reading, this was almost one of the last readings he gave, because Cayce died in January 3rd, 1945, and I don't think he gave readings, and very many of them, in the second half of that year, 1944. So, the 14 there is the 14th paragraph of reading 4083-1. Selfishness is the basic sin, and the soul that sins shall die. What are you going to do about it? These are unchangeable laws. That is all the God ye may know, that which ye apply in thy relationship with thy fellow man. Now, it sounds like there's a conflict here, because on the one hand, Cayce says the soul is eternal, and then right here he makes it very clear that selfishness is the basic sin, and the soul that sins shall die. What that death is that it is a disconnection between ourselves and our Creator. Because if that is the only power, the only force, the first cause in the universe, and we start to turn away from it and disconnect ourselves, to the extent that we disconnect ourselves from that one force, is how far we die. Now, it could be we're just fading slowly into the distance, but I think eventually we all hit bottom and then we turn around and figure out, just as the prodigal son did, there's a better way to go about all this. So that's what he's meaning here when it says, the soul that sins shall die. It's also an interesting one. A lot of people don't break it down to this, because I know when I talk to various groups who don't really have a metaphysical background, and I say the only true sin is selfishness. And they're going, aren't there 7 deadly sins and all this? If you were to follow a hierarchy of all of those, it all comes back to us separating ourselves out from the whole. As a matter of fact, I always like to go to an extreme example. What was Adolf Hitler doing? Adolf Hitler is trying to create his own version of what he would call heaven with the Aryan race. He says, these are my chosen people, if you were to put it in, in the terms of the Bible. As screwed up as that whole notion was, if all he had were Aryan people around him, he's thinking, we are all one now, and we've gotten rid of all the dross in society. Now, that is love and good misapplied. But he's not that far off from what the good really is, that God says, okay, now expand it. Don't exclude anybody. All of us are the chosen people, are the people that we're trying to save and bring together instead of excluding anyone. So the good misapplied really, even in the worst of the circumstances like that, does make sense along that way. Oh, this is another question that comes up when we're talking about how does a perfect soul make sin, or make a decision to sin the first time? You ever thought about this? I mean, it's a very vexing question. If you are perfect, if you have the mind of God, and you are omniscient and omnipotent, you have the mind of God, how do you sin? How's this? If you were to take a traditional Christian and you say, what is to keep us from sinning if and when we go to heaven? So let's take a traditional Christian standpoint for a second that says we pass away from this life and we accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior, even though we've committed all these sins and we would continue to choose our sinful ways here on earth, but we die and suddenly we're zapped sinless. Jesus has taken all of his sins onto him, and therefore we are now clean to be able to enter into the kingdom of heaven. What about the first time somebody gets in our way, walking down the golden streets or through the pearly gates or whatever, the first time somebody cuts us off, how are we going to react to that? Are you going for that last piece of food on the table and a fork gets there in front of you or whatever? I'm just saying that there's always going to be an opportunity to get crossways with another person. So what will keep us from sinning in heaven? Assuming that we would make it there from a traditional Christian standpoint. By the way, this is a very compelling argument for why that's not true by the time I come through this. Because a traditional Christian's answer to that is the reason that we sinned in the first place is because we were tempted. We were tempted in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve because the serpent was there, right? And God says, don't eat from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They didn't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil until the serpent went over there and said, Eve, eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Eve goes, okay, well, I'll try that. And Adam, now you try it. And then pretty soon we all tried it. All right, so that's where they were coming from. If we get to heaven again, we will not be tempted. That's what the traditional Christian answer is. We will not be tempted to sin because the serpent isn't allowed in heaven. In fact, Habakkuk 1:13 says that God cannot look upon evil. See, I told you I had to listen to all that in my pillow speaker. Who even knew there was a book in the Bible called Habakkuk? But it says that God cannot look upon evil. So if we understand that that's the nature of the whole thing, then we go, we just won't be tempted. We're going to be these perfect characters. Now, your answer to that, or a response to that, at least it is to mine when I'm talking to a traditional Christian, and it says, so explain Lucifer to me. You have Lucifer in heaven. There is no temptation up there, and yet that perfect angel, if you will. By the way, Cayce says Lucifer is a soul, not an angel. I'll go into that in a little bit. But you have this perfect being who made a selfish choice. More than one, but certainly the first one. So how, without temptation, do you wind up making that choice? It's a very compelling argument as far as, oh my gosh, we can sin again when we get into heaven, which is what Cayce says is the case. We never lose our free will. We can go ahead and choose to sin again once we're in heaven. One of the reasons why we probably won't, how many people have willingly touched a hot stove a second time? Because after you've done that and you go, that was really unpleasant. And not only do I get back up to where I have this omniscience and omnipotence, I don't even have a curiosity about trying to go down that road again. It's really clear I don't want to touch the hot stove a second time. But how does it happen the first time? The best analogy I've heard for this is, imagine, I remember I grew up in Orange County, California. We don't have one-way streets in Orange County, California. Everything's a two-way street, and I remember the first time I tried to go see probably a Diamondback or a Suns game down there, and I'm driving and I want to turn left. And I did. I shouldn't have. All right, I'm turning left, and the next thing I know, thank God there were no cars coming, because I just looked left and I saw there was the entrance to the parking structure that I wanted. I turn left and I go, oh dear, and I turn in left real quick and I'm able to get in there, and I went, say, that worked. All right, my intention was not to break the law. But I can tell you, what if I go up to that street the next time and I look down and I go, nobody's coming? And it made it a little easier the next time to do it. And then the next time it's even easier. And if you see one car you coming going, you'll get out of my way. And then you go, and then there's a lot of cars coming and say, I don't want to go all the way around. I'm just going to go right on through. Now, I'm not saying I do that, but I'm saying if you did it the first time and you did it even innocently enough, you can see that, oh, I did that and there were no negative repercussions out of the whole thing. Not every rule necessarily applies. No, because the second time you did it with the intent of, I am purposely breaking this law, not accidentally doing it. And guess what happens? Instead of being right there at the light, you start to turn a little bit. And you start to disconnect yourself from the omniscience, omnipotence, the love of God, to the point where you're not playing with a full deck anymore. Here you got a full deck. All right? You start to turn away from it, and you have lesser and lesser information to go along with that. So the first thing that happens when you start trying to solve your problems in life, when you turn away from God, the only thing that you have left from there is you've cut yourself off from things in spirit, unconditional love. All of the fruits of the Spirit that are out there, you cut yourself off of it, and the next thing you know, you run into things that do not make sense from a spiritual standpoint. So you go, well, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. There's no such thing as forgiveness. This is the law. There's 613 of them in the Old Testament, right? For the Judaic Law. Back in the day, here are the laws that you follow. And if you ever talk to scholars or rabbis about this, you go, we weren't really big on prisons back then. You usually got killed if you messed up. That was, I don't know if you've ever read those horrible things that say if the child is disobedient to the parents, you kill him. If the woman is adulterous, off her with her head, and that sort of thing. It was really not a very kind and loving outcome. So they have this, you follow the law. And guess what happens from there? If you cut yourself off from what's logical, because even the Jewish sect from today, even if that's what the Torah says, they go, well, we're changing with the times. And the times say you don't kill everybody for that stuff, and so they change with it. But pretty soon, if you only got yourself down to you come off from the spiritual, you cut off from the mental, you just start reacting like an animal. And I think that's really what happens with people who, like with domestic violence. I think that men start to beat up women in the homes because they have cut themselves off from God, and they've even cut themselves off from logic. All they know is they're unhappy with something and they're going to hit. And that's how they're going to solve everything from that point on. This is what happens with that first step, that first turn down the wrong street, that we start to cut ourselves off from the light until we're completely facing away from the light and there is no light to be seen, and we just start reacting out of instinct. Well, this is a really hard graphic to understand. what I like to show here is go back to that concept that I had before in terms of the zygote. Imagine that this is, in the beginning, there was God. So think of that as being the circle. And that there was nothing inside of the circle. There was just God and the perfect potential that God has in terms of omniscience, omnipotence. Now, when you create other souls with free will, there is this imaginary line that sits here and says, all right, everything is still going to live and move and have its very being within the mind of God, but there are going to be loving choices that we can make or choices that God wouldn't make, which are selfish ones. And so there's I know I'm just because for a graphic I have to show limitations on it, but the circle goes on forever. So there's an infinite number of loving choices and an infinite number of selfish choices available to us at each time. Now here's an interesting one. Cayce makes a distinction between angels and souls. What are the difference between them? Angels have free will, but they only have free will to make choices from here up. Humans can make those choices and those choices. That's how you tell the difference between an angel and a human. If humans and angels are making the same choices, you can't tell the difference between them. They look and act and make the same choices all the time. And the next thing you know, everybody's making loving choices. That's what you've got. When you start to see somebody making a selfish choice and you're going, not an angel, not what you've got out there. And so angels, you're going, well, don't they feel bad about that? You know, Cayce actually channeled on occasion Michael, the Archangel Michael. And boy, when that the Lord of the Way. And if you were to hear Gladys Davis Turner, the secretary, she lived until I think 83. So I got to know her. She stayed at our house when she was out this way. So I do have a long connection with this Cayce story. And she would talk about when she was in there and suddenly Michael would come in, this is Michael, the Lord of the Way. Bow thine heads, thy sons of men. I mean, this is the way that it was coming across. And it's like, oh, this is not the kind and gentle, the cherub that you're thinking of out there. There is nothing wishy-washy about an archangel, especially with the kinds of things that he had to come in to say. So, and don't even have an understanding of how we could make decisions down here. It's like, because they can't make decisions down here, they can't understand why we would. I guess if you're perfect, you would never understand why we make the silly choices that we do. But this is where I wanted to go back and make the point about Lucifer, that the Bible talks about, they call him the king of Babylon, and say, was this the man that made the mountain shake and that sort of thing? But that's in Isaiah someplace. I can't remember exactly. But it winds up trying to make the distinction that says Lucifer was a fallen angel. And in fact, Cayce says not only was he not an angel, he was a soul, but Lucifer is going to make it to be one with God again eventually at the time of Lucifer's choosing. I mean, you never, ever wind up losing a soul along the way. God doesn't give up on us. And so we keep making ourselves as miserable as we want to be until we figure it out from there. So this makes it clear in terms of what are the choices available to us. Now, yep, I got time. What I wanted to be able to do is to give you an idea of how our choices work within time and space. This is a deep one, so stay with me for a moment. Most of you, probably all of you, have been to, not that they exist anymore, but a Blockbuster video. All right? Did you ever walk into that store and there were just thousands of movies all lined up right there? Imagine that standing in the middle of a Blockbuster video is just like a soul sitting here dead smack in the middle of all eternity. You're in the middle of a Blockbuster video, you're in the middle of all eternity. At that point, every one of those DVDs or videotapes or whatever you remember that's out there has an entirely different story. It could be a long time ago in a galaxy far away. It could be the latest sitcoms that you see on television, or a romantic comedy, or the horror film, or all of these infinite number of stories are sitting there. But are you experiencing any of them until you say, I'm going to pick this one, and I'm going to pop it into the machine, and I'm going to focus my attention on this particular story? Now, when you do that, and you get yourself engrossed in that story, what's happening with all the other stories? They're still going on. They're still there. The potential to look at those is there, and you could stop this one anytime and pick out another one or another one, but your focus will go here or here or here or here, and it's, if you want to call it sequential, that's kind of an interesting term, but yeah, your focus is only on one thing at a time. Now, here's what happens in a case like that. Do you want to watch the movies that have you down here not only with selfish choices, and that we're making selfish choices, and that we're unhappy and feeling this negative karma as we'd like to think of it, that's really just trying to guide us into making loving choices up here? So let me give you an example. Let's say that there was a person that we met. If 50% of marriages end in divorce, let's say that you come up to this point where you meet your spouse-to-be, and you come into this place where you have a labyrinth or a maze of all these paths right here, and you say, do I ask this person out, or do I, just walk away from this situation and go the other direction? Well, I'm going to ask him out, okay? And you start making all these loving choices, and then all of a sudden things take a turn and you start going down into here. What happens when you actually learn your lesson if you've had a really bad experience with them? It's like if there's no time or space. In other words, if you have got to a decision tree point where you started to make a bad choice, and you go there and you go, I'm not going to make that bad choice, I'm going to go up here. It's like you had two different movies. You had the movie that was the horror show down here, and you had the romantic comedy up here where things comedically turn out for the best. All right, so you got to this point where you said, where am I going to go? You experience what it was down here when you made some bad choices. You go back and say, I'm going to make a good one. You go up above the line, and this still exists. You just don't live there. This doesn't go away. All it is you took your attention off that lousy circumstance that made everything feel so bad right there, and you say, this is where I want to live. Now, on Earth, we have a lot of experiences down here. We have a lot up here too, but we have a lot of experiences down here that as soon as we learn to make a better choice, we quit living down here and we only make better choices up above. I don't know if that's clear, from what I said, but that's as close as I've been able to get to my explanation of what I get, intuitively. I will cover this slide and we'll take a break. Again, this is a 262 or a Search for God reading right here, done in 1935, and starting with the 10th paragraph. If you would know God, if you would know his glory, do good unto thy fellow man. Give expression of that love as the Son gave in his ministry among men, who went about doing good, giving praise and glory, not to self, not to a period, not to an ideal, but to God. For as he gave of myself, I can do nothing, but that the glory of God may be manifested among men. For this cause, for this purpose, came I into the world. Now, interestingly enough, what you're seeing right here within these quotes is a Bible reference. But what Cayce often did was to be able to tell us in English as exact as you can get when going from one language to another, probably from Aramaic to English. This is what it is that Jesus actually said in Aramaic with an English translation. I think I put it down here, yeah. Okay, John 5:30. I can of myself do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I don't seek my own will, but the will of my Father who sent me. So this is what was apparently, according to the Cayce reading, said by Jesus, and this is what was given in John 5:30. Especially if you were to something like the Lord's Prayer. Does it ever bother you? And it said, lead us not into temptation. I'm going, why would God lead me into temptation? That one never made sense to me. And of course, if you were to hear I won't give it to you word for word, but the Cayce interpretation of the Lord's Prayer very often comes up lead us when in temptation. It's not lead us not into temptation, lead us when in temptation, and deliver us from evil. Not but deliver us from evil, trying to make those clarifications. So when you realize that just those, little twisting of words right there comes out to be a real different understanding, not only of what Jesus was saying, but what our relationship is with God. Lead us not into temptation. Good grief. What does that mean? All right, so I should tell you that Cayce, in terms of the Bible, he was a real fan of it. In fact, if you're familiar with Church of Christ, there was a division of that that's called Disciples of Christ. That was what he was raised, and he continued to do that his whole life. He said, do not make a religion out of all of the readings that you're hearing right here. It would become a laughing stock unto the world, was actually a quote from the readings. Said, instead, use this material to be able to become a better Catholic, a better Jew, a better Baptist, a better Muslim, whatever it is. This material is to help you to become a better whatever it is that has already appealed to you, rather than usurp it whatsoever. So if we follow this, that it is really just trying to be kind, gentle, do good unto thy fellow man. Now, when I say be kind and gentle, that's probably more for a personality like mine. Some people are too much of a wallflower or wishy-washy, and being kind and gentle isn't their problem. Maybe they need to be more assertive. And I'll try to cover it in a minute. There was a example when I was going through management classes back in college. They had this thing that was called the NASA quiz or test, in which you have crash landed on the moon. You are a 3-day trip away from this, where you're supposed to, be able to get more oxygen and food and a ship to get back home again. And you had these 15 items. Prioritize the 15 items so that that you have the most important down to the least important. And it had things like, I'll give you 15. The least important one was a box of matches. Because if you're on the moon and there's no oxygen up there, you can strike that match all day and it won't do you any good at all, and it's just a little stick, so what is it going to do for you? Not much. The most important item on there was 2 oxygen canisters to be able to continue to breathe while you get over to the headquarters. And there's items in between. The most important part of this, in terms of a leadership example, was you come up with your own priority of the 15, and then they break you into small groups. And amongst the small groups, say 4 or 5 of you, you come up with a committee list. So you have your list and you have the committee list. Almost always, you wind up having a better committee list than you have an individual list of each one. Now, why would that be? It's because you take the eclectic knowledge of everybody within that group put together, then you can go, okay, would a .45 automatic gun have any use on the moon? Of course, I thought so because you could shoot moonmen with it. But people had other reasons. Remember, moon only has 1/6 of the gravity, so you could actually, with a straight arm, shoot the .45 gun, and it would literally the recoil would shoot you up. It could be a propulsion, so it wasn't the dumbest thing that they had there. You're going, but the bullet wouldn't ignite because you need oxygen for that to happen. Well, when they pack the bullet, it's an airtight seal in which the oxygen is already in there with the gunpowder. These are I'm just using that as an example so that you understand that in a group of people, everybody understands how that works. You ever see like a flare? It's saying, can you shoot off a flare, and will that work? And the answer is yes, for the same reason. The oxygen's built into the fuel on the flare. Have you ever seen it when they do it in the movies in an ocean and they shoot it and you can actually see the flare still lit up underneath the water? It's the same thing. You still had enough heat and you had oxygen to make it work. Anyway, the bottom line is they give you the correct answers, and then you compare your own answers and the group answers according to NASA's answers to see how you did. Most of the people wind up having a better committee answer than they did as an individual, for the reasons I said. There are some that they wind up having a better answer as an individual than the committee did. Now, what do you think they need to learn out of this? They need to learn that I need to speak up. I actually have something to contribute to this group, and because I'm such a wallflower, because I don't want to take a chance on being wrong. I don't want to have, and so you just keep quiet, even though it would be to everybody's advantage if you did. And then you have the problem that I did. Mine matched my committee. Now, when I went to college, I was much older. I mean, It's dog years in that time. They were all like 18 or 19. I was in my mid-20s because I took my time getting through all that. But those dog years of all of that, I went in, and just because of the force of a personality and the conviction with which you can say something winds up taking over the committee, and I looked at it and mine was identical to my committee's answers. And so what do I need to learn? That I need to let everybody else be able to step in and add something as well. So I think this is really what comes back when we're talking about how do you wind up being able to either be, how do you demonstrate good? Good is not always being kinder and gentler. Good isn't always trying to go in there and let it set everybody straight as far as how they should be doing something. We, each and every one of us, need to find a balance point for that. Picking up where we left off, God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. I like this line. John Piper is actually a more of a traditional Christian thinker. But when I looked at that and I'm going, this is what Cayce constantly stresses, is not to go out there and become antagonistic with people that, have a belief system that is different from our own. It recommends over and over again that we find the points of agreement. And so this is definitely a point of agreement. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. Satisfied in Him means that we accept His loving ways for our own. And so bringing those two together, you wind up having that work really well. Another statement that Cayce has is that we should not be satisfied, that we should be content but not satisfied. That's such an important distinction right there. So what's so important about that? Because if you're satisfied, you quit trying. You don't need to get better from that point. If you're satisfied, you said, this is all I need. But if you're content with what you have, yet not satisfied, so that you still are setting additional goals out there, things to be able to pursue, to reach for, to expand, and to offer more loving expansions of God's manifestations in the universe, then you are constantly improving along the way. And the idea is, if you're content but not satisfied, not only are you trying to improve, but you're not unhappy where you are. And that's, if there is a bottom line to the Cayce material that I find different from just about every other religion that I've studied, and I've studied a lot, and that is that if I'm talking about Christianity or in Hinduism or Buddhists or Islam or Jews, they are always talking about, we are trying to do things well here so that we can get the heck out of Dodge and go to heaven, nirvana, whatever you want to call it. That we are supposed to, we are kind of in a testing period, and we're trying to go through something here so that we can get the heck out of this place. And Cayce says, if you cannot find heaven right here on the earth with the people that you are, living with, you will not find it anywhere. This is how you find heaven, is to realize that you're not away from it, that we are right here in it right now if we will but recognize it. Do we think that Jesus was unhappy being here on the earth? It's like, oh God, do I really have to go? He came here willingly, not only willingly, but with joy in his heart. Here's an interesting one that is hard for most people to fathom, because you never see it in the greatest story ever told or all the other epic things that have to do with the especially with the last 24 hours of before Jesus was crucified. And that is, Cayce says that when he was carrying the cross on the way to Mount Calvary, Jesus laughed and joked. He's going along and he's being whipped in the crown of thorns, and he's been through hell for the last 24 hours, and he laughed and joked on the way to Mount Calvary. And the reason that Cayce says that we're talking about a soul whose entire mission for all of these years, and by the way, it's a lot of years, because Cayce's, the earliest reference I've heard in a Cayce reading to souls being on the earth is 10, are you ready? Million, with an M, years. Said that a soul could actually go into caves in the Pacific Southwest region and see drawings that they had put on the walls 10 million years before. That doesn't mean that they were a hominoid, human that was up there making a Rembrandt painting on the wall. I didn't want to give you that impression. But the idea is, it's been a long time that we have been on the earth. In fact, Cayce says, We have been here. We souls have been on this earth for millions and thousands of years, and we will still be here for hundreds and thousands to come before the last person turns the lights out here. So we've got some time to go still, as you could well guess. But the idea is that Cayce says that he laughed and joked on the way to the cross because he knew he was that close to finishing it. He was within hours of accomplishing a goal he had been working how long to be able to accomplish? And if you've got the mind of God working within you, the Christ consciousness working within you, how could you be anything but, yes, I'm almost there? So it makes a lot of difference for that. This is simply a Bible quote here, but it does get referred to in the Cayce readings from time to time. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. Obviously, this is Paul's letter to the Galatians. I always think it's interesting when you wind up being able to see within the Bible these things that inherently say that what Cayce is saying is true. You know, it says, if you are an heir, if you are truly an heir, doesn't that mean that you take on everything that, you know, if it's a parent leaving it to a child, aren't you taking everything that the parent had and they're bestowing it upon you? It isn't this, you know, you terrible, horrible soul who made all these sinful choices, and if it wasn't for Jesus, you wouldn't just barely qualify to get into heaven. This is really talking about being a true heir, who thought it not robbery to think themselves equal with God. Now, are we equal with God? Only when we're perfect. The moment we make a selfish choice and we start, you know, making choices that God wouldn't, suddenly we are not an heir anymore. We're the ones that are kicking ourselves out, and as long as we are making perfectly loving choices, then we've got access to everything that God knows and all the powers that God has available, which are unlimited. So being able to understand that what is it to be a slave? Being a slave, especially what it's talking about here, is making ourselves subservient to our own selfish desires. So that's what separates us from God. When we become a slave to our own selfish desires, we're no longer that perfect, omniscient being that God created us in his image to be. Here's another one of my really complicated graphics, in which it looks like a peace symbol, sort of, or maybe a Mercedes, I don't know. If you were in the Cayce readings, it winds up defining what are the attributes or parts of a soul. And you wind up having spirit, mind, and the free will. Now, the best, you know, I don't know if you've ever had electronic theory, but, you know, they try to use a water and a hose, you know, analogy between what is the volts and what is the amps and all that sort of thing. I actually find that it works very well with this. One of the things that Cayce says over and over again is the spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, and the physical is the result. Now, let me give you that water analogy and show it how it works. What if we say that the water of life is the spirit? All right, so the water that is going through the hose, and let's go ahead and say the mind in this case, you have the water that goes through the hose. The mind is the hose that you have right there, and where the nozzle gets pointed is analogous to the free will. If you go into your backyard and you go, I'm going to water this and not water that, isn't that your free will saying what's going to live and die as far as within your environment? You know, I think the Native Americans always said there's two wolves. You know, you have love and selfishness. Which one do you want to feed? And which one will survive and thrive? It's the same thing. There's only one power. The spirit is the life. The mind, being the hose, is the fact that we are this corpuscle in the body of God. And that you wind up having, through our free will, that's where the nozzle goes and says, these are the things that we're going to nurture in our lives, and these are the ones that we're going to let move off to the side. Back to a search for God. All are called into service. God is no respecter of persons. Our ability and our service begin with cooperation in being channels through which the glory of the Lord may be manifested in the earth. So, how many of you are familiar with the Aquarian Gospel? It's a channeled work by Levi. It's not all that well known, but it actually covers, it's a life story of Jesus. It's about, that long, maybe the size of that Search for God book. And it covers not only the lifetime of Jesus through 12 and from 30 to 33, but it covers what happened to him between 12 and 30 as well. Cayce never commented on it, and I'm not even sure. Yeah, it was definitely around in Cayce's time. I think it was in the early 1900s when it was channeled. I could be wrong about that. But the one story in particular really struck me as I was going through this, and it is so indicative of how we can glorify God and others through the choices and the healings and the help that we offer others. In the Aquarian Gospel, it talks about a woman went to Jesus and said, "My husband is a hopeless alcoholic." I'm giving it in English words. They did it much more like the King James Version. And that if he ever gets a hold of money, first thing he does is he goes out and he buys drink with it. And as a matter of fact, he's sleeping one off at what we pass for a house right now. And Jesus says, okay, so he goes with her. And you would think that he would sit down and there would be what would we call it, a come to Jesus meeting with the guy. So we wind up having, Jesus goes in there and he wakes the guy up. And the guy's like, whatever, he's hungover as can be. And he says, are you aware that on the other side of the village there was a fire last night, and many families wound up being homeless because of the damage that was done by this fire? These people need your help in order to be able to rebuild their lives and restore everything to the way it was. And the guy still kind of was like, what? And he goes, come on, let's go over there and you can get this thing going. And the guy stands up and he goes over, and by the time he gets to the other side of the village where the fire had taken place, he's sobered up enough that he starts organizing the people that were in the area, not only the ones affected, but volunteers to be able to put the project together to rebuild all of those homes. And so you wind up having this guy being the general contractor or supervisor of the project of all these volunteers that literally rebuilt the lives of all of the people that were affected by that, and he never drank again. Now, this is fascinating to me, because you don't take this guy and you throw him into a room with a whole bunch of other drunks and say, we're not going to give you anything for 30 days and we're going to talk about how to make this better. And they're going, all I want is a drink. And I feel like that's what happens so often. What he did is he says, other people need your help. Come with me and let's go make a difference in the lives of others. What does it do? It takes the focus off of you. It takes the focus off of the problems that you've created, not only for yourself and other people, but even the problem that you're experiencing right there, in order to be of service, to glorify God and the other people around you, and to help them out at the same time. And then you wind up never having the guy drink again. It's the way that the story ends up. And he winds up being a good, general contractor or builder that was, a great provider for his family from that part on. So the thing that's important about that, and this was always a tough one for me, and that is, when you see somebody that is just so down on their luck and made so many poor choices in their life, and you think, boy, that thing that Jesus said, how you treat the least of these is how you treat me, if you remember that quote out of the Bible. And it's so important because when I hear this, I'm going, this guy who was an absolute dead drunk second, in the next second, turned his life around without ever looking back. I mean, it can happen that quickly if we do it. And the other side of that, you have to, I wish I had the video for this one, but you'll probably be able to see it either between myself and Steve. For those, some of you have seen it. You take a water bottle, just like the normal ones that you buy, for 39 cents in the store, and this thing gets put into a freezer, and it literally shows that it is 14 degrees minus Fahrenheit, not minus centigrade, Fahrenheit. This is a very, very cold temperature, and the water is still liquid inside of this thing. And they very carefully pick the thing up, and the guy goes thunk right off of the side of the bottle, and you watch this thing turn into a solid block of ice inside of the bottle within seconds. Now, the reason for that is that all the conditions were right. It needed that catalyst in order to be able to follow through on how do you take this watery idea, if you will, and turn it into a solid three-dimensional manifestation. It needed that catalyst. Jesus was the catalyst in that case of the Aquarian gospel, where he said, all the potential's right there. You're still this, formless blob of whatever you are when you drink, and then you get up and you go with purpose, thunk right off it. Maybe he did it to his ear. I don't know. But you wind up offering that catalyst, and it solidifies into three dimensions. I think it really does and can work that way for us, even with the least of these. Because remember, even Jesus was the least of these to some of the people on the earth. So it doesn't matter what our opinions are and what the other individual is. You can be the least of these. Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we fail. It's to me, this one's so important because we fail a lot. God bless us all. You go out there and you wind up doing your best, and you go, I did it again. I did it again. Whatever the pattern is in our life that causes these things to go wrong. So it isn't the fact of whether we fail or not, but that we go back and we recognize what the pattern is, what we can do to improve upon it, and how we can go forward from there. What's interesting about this, and it gave me an easier way to be able to view it, and that is, we see somebody like I was talking about with the Aquarian gospel, and the guy goes on a bender, and he ties another one on, and then Jesus wakes him up and changes his life. That bender was one of the most important steps that guy had in recovery. Because if he hadn't done that, would his wife gone and found Jesus to bring him back and be able to offer the healing opportunity that he did that changed that man's life? So when you're looking at it, you're going, oh my gosh, he failed again. You're looking at him like that, and you're going, but if he hadn't done that, the circumstances that changed his and everyone around his life would not have taken place in the way that they did. So when we're seeing somebody that's hit bottom, that can actually be, each one of the times that happens, could be the next step that they take in their life to becoming a better person. Longer reading here, but it focus on the underlined section here in the middle. So the question is, any message for the group as a whole? So in other words, the members of that study group were asking Cayce in an altered state if there was a message for the group altogether. Much of that ye seek, the group, ye ask, may become confusing unless the information, the interpretation, the application of same in thine experience is kept in its own realm. For as has been given, the interpretation of spiritual law is in spirituality. The interpretation of material law is in materiality. Confuse not thyself, but study to show yourselves approved, not by wisdom, not by might, but in that which is the perfect law of the Lord. If you were to talk to an atheist, if you go to church and you tithe and give donations to the church, and you talk to an atheist about it, you think they're not laughing at you? From their perspective, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever why you would ever give money to a church. If there is no God, why would, first of all, you waste your time going to a church, let alone starting to take your own hard-earned dollars and donate it to an organization that is strictly there for a deity that doesn't exist in their opinion? So this is what I'm trying to give you, is an idea that the only way that tithing makes sense is if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, certainly not from a secular one. All right? But when if you were to also talk to an atheist about how about Habitat for Humanity, suddenly they're all in favor of that. All right? Because it isn't that an atheist, for the most part, isn't somebody who has anything against humanity, thinks everybody should get along and that the golden rule is a wonderful idea. There's just no intelligent design behind the universe, or that we have to answer to at any particular time. So if you're looking at the interpretation of these things in materiality, tithing makes sense if you're doing it toward your fellow man instead of trying to do it from a spiritual sense and that you're giving back to God. I remember probably one of the greatest examples of this, I was listening to a radio evangelist one Easter morning, and he was giving this impassioned, I was driving to Unity of Phoenix for the Easter sunrise service, and he was giving an impassioned talk about, are we the stupidest people in the world to forgive others 70 times 7? If they ask for our shirt, that we give them our coat. Are we the stupidest people in the world to do that if Jesus had not died on the cross for our sins? I personally took offense to that. Because I'm looking at this going, wouldn't you do that whether there was God or not? Wouldn't we want to be able to help? Because that's how things go on in perpetuity anyway. That's one of the things that Cayce was very clear about, is that the universe, is here because God created it this way. But it is created so perfect that it's just on automatic pilot right now, as far as that goes. It is so perfectly tuned as far as the way that it works with the universal laws that it doesn't need any tweaking or anything to go along with it. So we can look at it and think, there's no God behind this because it's working just fine on its own. Well, here's this preacher who's sitting there saying, if it hadn't been for Jesus, dying on the cross and allowing us to go to heaven, we would have no reason to be nice to other people. And I personally looked at that and go, wow, is that really where he's coming from? I was hoping he was just off on a tangent at that point, but it was a little scary. And, if you ever see these up here in the brackets where it says 585, just like 262 indicates all those readings belong to the A Search for God readings, 585 is allowing that person to remain anonymous, but it is always going to be, in other words, there would be a 585-1-2-3 if they'd had 1, 2, and 3 readings. So this is person 585 in group number 1 who is asking a question. And the question is, what in the chapter of glory would be your particular personalized message for me? What they did is they said, what is the personalized message for each one of us? Start with person 585. I'm trying to give you context of where the 585 is not a question in and of itself. So the answer is, let the glory of the Father, through thy efforts in thy dealings with thy fellow man, bring thee peace. For like begets like, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. Now, one of the things that, I alluded to it earlier, as far as how do we wind up, should you be kinder or gentler, or should you be more, more forceful, more assertive in being able to deal with other people? And there won't be an exact answer for any two people out there. If you're familiar with the Cayce reading, 70 or not quite 70% of them were medical in nature. He gave 14,360 are recorded in the database that they have. About almost 70% of those were medical in nature. The other ones were more metaphysical or spiritual types questions. And so the far-reaching work that he had was on the medical side. Do you know that when you would take something like arthritis, and you say, here's how you would deal with arthritis, he didn't have, maybe as much as 60% or so gave the same diagnosis for each person that was out there. In other words, the 60% of what he recommended were shared amongst all of them. There was this 40% that tweaked it a little for that one, and that person should use something else over here and that over there. And it was, it took me a long time to understand why this would be. First of all, yes, each one of us has our own constitution, has our own peculiarities. Some of us are allergic to things that others are not, and so on. But here was one that was fascinating. It had to do, I don't think it was arthritis, but it was a common ailment in which I realized that both of the people that were asking for help from Cayce had very similar symptoms. And in the one case of the guy, they said, you are working with a doctor so-and-so, and he has these, real expensive treatments that he was going through, and he goes, these are very good. You should continue on with those. And this other guy, he was out there saying, okay, here are the things to get. And it was like, get witch hazel and eye of newt and toe of frog, and, I'm kidding, but he was putting these unusual ingredients together, but you could get them at a common local drugstore. And if you go back and you look at the individual histories of these two, the one that was going through the expensive treatments with the doctor was wealthy. And this guy didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And he was literally giving the answer of what would allow them to work with what they had in order to heal themselves according to what they had in terms of money to be able to deal with it. And so when we understand where somebody is coming from, and going back to this thing of whether you should come at it, more gentle, kind and gentle, or come forceful, there really are 2 kind of iconic people that come to mind for me to make this example. One of them is Mother Teresa. Everybody knows who Mother Teresa is, and she was kind, and she never got on the Hindu people that would come in. They asked for help. She didn't try to convert them to being Catholic or anything else. She just offered help and food and medical care to whoever needed it. Another one was General George Patton. Most of you know who that is. Do you know that was a very religious, very spiritual man who also believed in reincarnation? He was a real proponent of reincarnation. He was a real proponent of that there was a God and that there was a right and wrong way to do things. And he also, if you remember the story, he slapped a soldier for being a coward and got in a lot of trouble for that. So he had a really stern way about himself. I use those 2 as iconic ways to be able to reach people. I had the interesting experience of going through basic training and military training when I was much younger. And I watched people go in there with me, and some of the people came in as just, are you kidding me? You're never going to make it. And they actually did measure up and became squared away soldiers by the end of it. And other ones went in there and just couldn't adapt, and they just got thrown out of the military. So you take all of these people and you put them in there, and I'm going, the ones that couldn't adapt really needed to go find Mother Teresa. And there were some that actually thrive in being given bullet points of how to be able to perform and a set of rules and guidelines according to live their life, and they measured up to a much higher level than what they had had before then. Fascinating to watch that happen, while you're going through all this stress of drill sergeants yelling at you and questioning your parentage. It was fun for me to go through that. So, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. Probably have heard of C.S. Lewis before, and that's a quote from him. An interesting thing that comes up in the Cayce material is that God does not forgive us. I'll just let that hang there for a second. You're going, God does not forgive us. And you're going, absolutely not. And the reason God does not forgive us is because he doesn't have to. God never condemned us in the first place. The only reason that you need to forgive anybody is if you had negative thoughts or condemning thoughts about the other person in the first place, because you never took offense to what they did. It always surprised me when I read in the Bible about Noah, it said God repented or regretted that he created humankind. I'm going, how does an omnipotent, creator regret the thing coming about that they already knew was going to happen? Wouldn't you just not do it if you're going to regret it later on? I mean, that's where we wind up having this limited human understanding, limiting everything. So the idea that God has forgiven us is not exactly right. God never condemned us to begin with, but we do have condemning thoughts of each other as we have transgressions in each other. So let's take a look at that. These are John Schroeder's unofficial 6 steps to forgiveness. Doesn't necessarily come out of the Cayce readings, but my understanding of how they apply. In order to get to forgiveness, first of all, you have to condemn somebody, as I just said, since God doesn't. So we can have condemning others for their transgressions. And when I say this is a spectrum, like being on the spectrum of autism, that you can have like Asperger's all the way to, where they're incommunicative. And so you wind up, if you have condemned others, then you are on your first step to forgiveness, because now you need to forgive. You get to the second one. We will, from that point, recognize our need to forgive them to free both of us. You ever hear that when you're trying to keep somebody down in the gutter, you're there yourself with, with your knee in their neck or whatever? You've got right there in the gutter with them in order to leave them there. Well, in order to no longer condemn somebody, you have to be able to forgive them. And it releases both of you, and you do. And then you understand that in theory. Now you have to go into the application. Finally, ready to forgive them with conditions. And we said, well, if they'll apologize to me, or if they'll, stand up and shoot straight from that point on, or whatever the conditions wind up being, we wind up saying, if they'll do this, then I'll forgive them. Then we can get to the point where we accept that, okay, someday we'll laugh about this and actually believe it. Because, haven't we been through that? I mean, enough parents in here to realize, and the kids come up and say, do you remember when such and such happened? And it winds up being a family joke as opposed to the traumatic event of whenever it took place out there. And so we get to the point where we accept and we really don't condemn, and it even becomes humorous. In fact, the Cayce readings are real big on humor. They say that if you can find the humor in it, you can heal from it. Then you can release the conditions that and or need to see them karmically suffer. That's probably the toughest one. After you understand metaphysics and you reap what you sow, you're going, okay, well, I can let go of this because I know they've really got it coming to them. And then, the Bible even says, rejoice not in iniquity, so that you can just allow the fact of saying, instead of they're going to get their comeuppance, that instead you wind up saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's where you wind up being able to get to that fifth step. And then finally, see the God in them, and that we don't lose sight of it. Because once you can say, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do, you really don't, not only do you no longer condemn them, you are encouraging their rehabilitation, if you will. So it's really, really important to understand that we start out condemning and get all the way to the example that Jesus gave us. Being kind, not in some great deed or heroism, not in some great speech or act that they may be pointed to with pride, but rather little kindnesses from day to day. It's interesting. Cayce said this: Jesus, including the incarnation as Jesus, had 30 lifetimes on the earth, 30 different incarnations on the earth. Some of those you already know. How about Enoch? Melchizedek, Joseph, the coat of many colors. Adam was also him. So when of the 30 lifetimes that he had, he was Joshua as well. So the 30 lifetimes, there were so many that we have that came from the readings. I think there were 12 that were given in the readings out of the 30 altogether. Then an interesting question was asked, and they said, what were the most important lifetimes that the soul of Jesus had here on the earth? And the answer didn't give the actual answer, asked a question back and said, as mankind counts such, or as the greater spiritual growth was experienced by the soul? So in other words, of the 18 out of 30 lives, you can bet that even if it wasn't lifetimes that he had in recorded history, that the greater soul growth was not when he was one of these famous people out of our history. That the greater soul growth for the soul of Jesus to be able to attain the Christ consciousness. In fact, the Cayce readings referred to him as Jesus who became the Christ. It indicates saying that, that's how it happens. Let me give you one of the lifetimes that I think, as I watch it, have studied it, is one of the ones that Cayce didn't mention that were his 30. One of the 30. And that was as the first Pharaoh that believed in one God instead of many gods, and his name was Akhenaten. You may not have heard of the Pharaoh Akhenaten, but you will have heard of his son, King Tut. Everybody hears of King Tut, right? Because we got lots of gold to back that one up. Well, Akhenaten, when he came to power, as I said, was a believer in monotheistic. He was a believer in one God. And that was a very corrupt nation or land when he took over. And he went in and did what I'll call legislative morality. He goes, here's our religion, here are our laws, here's how we're going to treat each other, and we're going to treat each other with kindness, goodness, we're going to be honest, we're not going to have this backdealing and all that. I can't tell you how many of his advisors he upset who were on the take and making themselves rich by doing that, and it cut them all off from that. So what happened is that the whole Egyptian land began to prosper under this new way of being able to do things. Sounds like it's a great thing to do, right? He said, here are the laws, everybody follows it. They did, everybody starts to prosper. I don't know if you remember what happened to King Tut's father, Akhenaten, but he was assassinated. He upset everybody. Akhenaten was the least of these to certain people. And in being the least of these to certain people, kills Akhenaten, and because the boy king, or Pharaoh, King Tut, was too young, they appoint what are called regent or regents to be able to run the land. And guess who they were? The guys that are sticking money in their pocket on the side. And the whole land turned corrupt again. What kind of a lesson can you learn from that? As the soul, Jesus on the other side, who's just come out of this going, well, that didn't work out so well. What happened? Well, guess what happened? He tried to legislate morality and said, I'm going to tell each and every one of you how you need to live, and look at what's going to happen. And for a while, it looked like it worked. Everything was going well, and it was prosperous. But when you don't win the hearts and minds of everybody to come along with you and you try to legislate morality, it's inevitable that it is doomed for failure. That's exactly what happened. So what happens when he does learn the lesson and he comes back? He comes back as Jesus, and when Satan's sitting there putting him on the hill and you can just wave your hand and have them do exactly what you want, he says, get thee behind me, Satan. Then when he goes down there, he goes, if you like what you see, if you like what I'm saying, follow me. He didn't say, you will live like this, and here are your 613 laws. He goes, if you want to live with unconditional love, if you want to forgive 70 times 7, if you want to give them your coat when they're asking for your shirt, then guess what? That's what you're going to wind up doing. And you will be better people for it. So it's an interesting way to be able to measure what do we have to be great people while we're doing that, or is the greater growth the things that are not necessarily above the fold on the paper? The greater obstacle, the more glory in overcoming it. You know, I think this is probably true of a lot of people that, some of the greatest accomplishments in our life may not even be recognizable to other people. The things that we've overcome, or the patience that we have shown, or the relationships that we've been able to work out and work through. And this is where it becomes so important as far as why Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life, according to Cayce. It's not that he died for our sins, but he set the perfect role model by which we all know what we have to do from here. Good example of this is, if you're familiar with Roger Bannister. He was the first person to break the 4-minute mile. They thought that it was almost like you can't break the sound barrier. For the longest time, they thought that a human being could not run a 4-minute mile. And so it just went on for decade after decade, nobody was able to do it until he did. Within 3 years after Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, 16 more people did it. How about Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean? How many more were able to follow him after he did it the first time? That is really the importance of Jesus in being the way, the truth, and the life. Is he came in here and he said, this is how you achieve the Christ consciousness. Pick up your cross and follow me. I'm not going to give you bullet points of how the 613 laws you've been living up to now, you can just let those go and love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. Boom, you've done it. You're there. And so this is the obstacle to overcome for all of us, is to be able to use the role model that was within Jesus and the more glory in overcoming it by being able to glorify him and ourselves at the same time. 3 phases of our human experience, body, mind, soul, are expressed in the earth, and their freedom comes in a threefold manner through knowledge, interpretation, and application. So if we understand that we learn things, so you can read the Bible or read the Cayce readings, and you interpret it as it makes sense to you, and then you go out there and apply it in your life, and then you can refine it from there. You go, I didn't exactly take what I had learned and interpret it correctly, because when I applied it, I figured out I need to do these little tweaks to make things happen. And so that's really the best way to approach things, is to keep refining it after we've actually applied it in our lives. Now, I told you I would get to this one as far as describing what it was. In the beginning, there was God. There was that first cause, and that's all that existed. Now, imagine of the way that all of manifestation comes out there, you have that original first cause in terms of the Father. Then you have, I'll go down to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, the Cayce readings describes as the law of love. Okay? Everything manifests in the law of love. That's why the universe, keeps having all these beautiful circles, and the way the planets all rotate around the sun and seems to be in such beautiful harmony for such randomness as an atheist would have you believe that it unfolds like that. But the most interesting one is the Son, because traditional Christianity would tell you that's Jesus. And Jesus will tell you that even the things that he's done, we will do in greater. Interestingly enough, the way the Cayce readings describe that is the Son is all of us. It's not just the Son as in the male, one child. It's the Son as in the progeny of God. So we have God, the original, live and move and have our very being within the first cause. All of the progeny that were created in God's perfect image, manifesting, hopefully, the law of love in every choice that we make as we expand more and more on God's creation out there. So the idea that the Son is all-inclusive of every one of us is really a very different concept in the Cayce readings than you get in a lot of other religions. Explain what is meant by glorified in John 14:13. And whatsoever ye shall ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If we as individuals will but look about us as to the ways of man and his knowledge of those things that go to make up the elemental influences of the earth, we can see and experience that as the Master gave. That the children of this world are wise in their own conceit. Again, that the children of this world are wise even unto those that are the children of light. I'll bet the Sadducees and Pharisees really thought they'd pulled one over on Jesus by using the Romans in order to kill him, right? And they're going, we didn't have to be the ones to go out there and do all the dirty work. We just manipulated the law to be able to get that to happen. And frankly, let's face it, what better way to go ahead and cement the story of what Jesus did throughout all of history than to make him a martyr at the end of it? If he would have gotten married and had kids like, so many things talk about, that wouldn't have been nearly as exciting a story as the way that it did wind up ending according to the Bible. So in a longer range perspective, we understand that while the sons of darkness, if you will, were the children of this world, were wise, they're thinking, boy, we really pulled one over on him. And he goes, actually, you provided the exact vehicle that is going to make this story last forever out there. And then question 16 of reading 57, these are called the Jesus readings, I believe, 5749. Is the average fulfillment of the soul's expectation more or less than 50%? It's an interesting question because what it's saying is are we more successful in gaining spiritual ground in our quest to become one with God each life or not? So it's saying, if it's less than 50%, is humankind going down or is humankind getting closer to God? The answer is it's a continuous advancement, so it's more than 50%. Now, imagine for a moment if I just put a graph right here and this top line and then a line over here. And this is time, or our experiences going out, and this is how close we are to God. So we start out here, and we start sinning, and all of a sudden we have ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, and we hit bottom, and then we start having ups and downs until we come to be one with God again. You see this jagged line that went up and down. What part of that line should not be there? Wasn't every single thing that we would look at and define as good or bad, didn't it have to be there as far as connecting the dots from one end to the other to get us back to where we were? So the idea is it's always continuous, even if it looks like we're headed down, it's yet another step that we needed to take so that we would make the right choice to turn back around in the other direction. And again, as it is with the prodigal son, the story is he had to get so badly off to the point where he said, these pigs are eating better than I do. I should really turn around and start heading back because whatever I can get has got to be better than whatever I have created for myself here. And that's it.